Welcome to the Old Capitol Museum. We are standing on the first floor in this National Historic Landmark, built in 1839, which makes us 175 years old this year. This is the oldest surviving building in Jackson and a place where Mississippi history happened. Over the 175 years, many things occurred in this building within these halls that affected Mississippi's history and made us what we are today. From 1839 to 1903, this building served as Mississippi's State House, which was the witness of many important laws passed, visits by important statesmen across the South. A lot of important events took place here. For instance, Mississippi seceded from the Union in this building in 1861, passed our last two state constitutions, even the one that is in existence today, passed in 1890. Most of our colleges and universities were chartered in this very building. Laws that granted rights to many of our citizens, and then later on laws that took away many of those rights. So it's easy to say that within these walls, Mississippi is where it is today due to the events that took place here. We are standing inside the Building the Old Capitol and Historic Preservation Gallery here at the Old Capitol, where we discuss a number of issues. For instance, Greek Revival architecture, that is the style that this building was built in, obviously resembling the Greek temples in Greece. Very much a symmetrical building with beautiful columns, a great rotunda and dome, and a beautiful portico at the front. We also discussed William Nichols, who was the architect of the building. He was a native of England, had done a lot of work in other state capitals such as Alabama and North Carolina. He was actually the second architect hired. The state of Mississippi had to fire the first architect because they didn't like his work. So they kind of had to start over after he got the first floor built. So the beginnings of the building had some difficult history, but Nichols was able to complete the project and move on. He later went on to design our governor's mansion and the Lyceum up at Ole Miss, so a very much renowned architect is William Nichols. In 175 years, the building has had a very tumultuous history in regards to its structure. The foundation here that we sit on is very difficult. Yazoo clay has caused a lot of foundation changes over the years. There's been storms, hurricanes have ravaged this city, believe it or not. In 1909, a hurricane came through and ripped off the roof. And in 2005, of course, Hurricane Katrina came through and ripped off the roof as well, which led us to our new restoration here, where we think we have created the most accurate representation to date of what the building looked like back in 1839. One of the most interesting exhibits we have in this room is what we call our rubble structure. During this last restoration, the contractors and builders pulled a lot of stuff out that we put in kind of a main rubble structure to kind of be a visual representation of the building's kind of rise and fall. So in this structure we have 1840 bricks, we have some 1961 fluorescent lighting, and we literally have the kitchen sink that was in our lounge during those years. I think the rotunda dome is the distinction that most people look at as soon as you walk in and we greet you at our front desk. We always ask our visitors to look up and stare at the dome rising 94 feet to the top. Some of the ornamentation inside that dome is original. A lot of questions we get in the building is what is original and what is 175 years old, and depending on where you are in the building you get a different answer. But inside the interior dome, the rosettes and the ornamentation is about 175 years old. So it's our ooh-ah moment, so to speak, whether you're adults or kids who come into the building. Kids love to come in and stare up and twirl into circles, so we enjoy giving them that feeling of awe here at the Old Capitol. Now we're standing in the governor's office here at the Old Capitol, a room we restored to the best of our ability to what it would have looked like when the building was State House. There have been many descriptions of this room throughout the years. One of the most interesting ones comes in 1861. A British correspondent was here in Jackson, probably covering the secession convention, and he wrote numerous comments about the outlook of the building. He describes the governor's office as one being of Republican simplicity. Which is very interesting. The governor's office was very nice, but he, obviously coming from Great Britain, was probably used to covering the queens and kings of court. So the governor's office, the chief executive, apparently did not impress that British correspondent very much. John J. Pettus was one of the governors who served Mississippi throughout the years. He served during the Civil War. Very much a fire eater, meaning he would rather eat fire than ever eat lunch or have lunch with any Yankee. Pettus, of course, was important to Mississippi because he was, of course, instrumental in leading Mississippi out of the Union, becoming the second state to do so following South Carolina and eventually joining the rest of other southern states that led to the Confederate States of America. Of course, Jefferson Davis, Mississippi's own, became the president of the Confederacy. In the governor's office, which kind of had an interesting role during the war, War. The building was captured several times during the war. The first time was in May of 1863, and when Union Army and soldiers first came into the building, one of the first people to come in here was a man by the name of Fred Grant. Fred Grant was the son of Union General Ulysses S. Grant, and according to legend and story in Fred Grant's own autobiography, he apparently came into the governor's office, and when he came in, there was this still lit pipe from Governor John J. Pettus that he apparently confiscated for his own use. Another governor I like to talk about is Adelbert Ames. Ames was a governor during Reconstruction. He was a Union general who came down and lived in Mississippi and eventually became governor. He had to deal with the violence of Reconstruction, a very difficult time in Mississippi as Mississippi is trying to go through those years of trying to deal with the former freedmen and dealing with a lot of whites who were not very happy about the situation and where Mississippi was going. Ames was eventually forced to get out of office and move out. Another governor I like to talk about is A.H. Longino. He was the last governor to serve in this building and was the first governor to serve in the current state capitol. We call it the new capitol, even though it was built in 1903, so it's 111 years old, but it is the new capitol to us. Longino had to deal with the difficult issues of trying to maneuver himself out of this building and relocate government back over to a new structure. We are now standing in the most historic room in the state of Mississippi. This is the House of Representatives chamber, which was a witness to many of the most important events in our state's history. For instance, on January 9th of 1861, delegates voted 84-15 to pull Mississippi out of the Union. And the reasons were very clear. They didn't leave much doubt in regards to their documentation, the journals that were passed and the statements that were made. They were doing it, these delegates, to defend the institution of slavery. There was a tremendous concern on what would happen with a new Republican government in national office if the institution of slavery would be attacked and would be, tried to be abolished. That's one of the most common questions we get here at the museum is why did Mississippi secede from the Union? And from that point of view, it's clear it's to defend the institution of slavery. That, I think, is a different question than why did soldiers fight in the Civil War. I think that's a different issue entirely. The young man who lives in rural Mississippi who does not own any slaves is probably fighting and enduring the hardships of war due to other issues besides slavery. He's doing it for home. He's doing it for his state. He's probably not doing it to protect slavery, an institution he doesn't even take part in. And so I think that's a very fine line that we today in Mississippi and across the country struggle with trying to determine the causes of war, the reasons people fight, and why this country erupted into 4 years of bloody civil war. Besides all the passage of important legislation, this room has witnessed many important statesmen who have been here in this building. One of the most famous visits by anyone was Andrew Jackson. He came in 1840, basically a year after the building had been built, and was asked to speak here in his namesake city. Jackson, of course, is named after our 7th President of the United States. Andrew had been asked to go to New Orleans to take part in the 25th anniversary of his victory at the Battle of New Orleans and the British during the War of 1812. And when city leaders learned he was going to be there, they asked him to come here. And so he did at age 73, came to Jackson. It was a huge event in the young city. Many of the town's residents had been asked to come to the state capitol and help decorate it to make it festive for the president's appearance. Jackson was supposed to speak in this room, but at age 73, his voice was so frail, he was unable to do it. So his nephew actually read his speech from the front portico instead. Another important visit was by Jefferson Davis. He came in December of 1862 to boost sagging morale during the Civil War. He was accompanied by his main general, Joseph E. Johnston, who vowed to be indefatigable in defense of Mississippi. Many Mississippians would remember those quotes when Vicksburg and Jackson fell in the summer of 1863. After the Civil War, one of the more interesting stories that took place in this room deals with a man named John Roy Lynch. John Roy Lynch was a former slave who earned his freedom during the Civil War and rose dramatically throughout the ranks, becoming a member of the Mississippi House of Representatives and eventually becoming the first black speaker of the House of Representatives. Spoke in this very room. He went on to become a U.S. representative. So one of the biggest rags to riches stories is John Roy Lynch, who we like to talk about. This room has seen a very dramatic change in looks throughout the years. From the beginnings in 1839 through the end of the Civil War, this room would have been dominated by white men. serving as representatives for Mississippi. After the Civil War and during Reconstruction, African Americans finally had the opportunity to take part in the political process and did that for the next 10, 15 years. Unfortunately, Mississippi went through what is known as the redemption process, where the white Democratic Party regained control through violence and economic intimidation and basically removed many black office holders and prevented them from voting. So for the next 100 years almost, whites again redominated the legislature and the political process, and that was not overturned until the modern civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Hurricane Katrina was a dramatic event in the history of the old Capitol. In August of 2005 is when Hurricane Katrina came through Mississippi, devastating the Gulf Coast and making its way all the way to Jackson, where it removed our roof. Prior to Hurricane Katrina, this building served as the State History Museum. We talked about everything from the Native Americans to the present day. The hurricane changed all that. Made us shut down as a state history museum and closed us down until a decision was made to restore the building and turn it into a new museum with a new purpose. We're very proud and excited about our new restoration. We are convinced we have done the most accurate restoration to date. With limited money and funds and times, we're convinced that when you walk these halls, you're walking in the building as close as it could be to 1839. But Katrina was a devastating effect, and yet we also look at it as a good thing. Without Katrina, we would not have got the bond bill to restore the building and to do all the new, exciting, innovative, interactive exhibits that really tell the history of this important place. This is a National Historic Landmark, the most important building in Mississippi. And now when visitors come, they can walk the halls, see exhibits, and leave this building with a feeling of this is where history happened. History happened here is our motto, and we hope people walk away with that idea.